Have you ever come home and realized it's no longer yours? The lock won't open. The key you've used for 20 years breaks in your hand. And behind the door, strangers live where your memories used to breathe. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever lost something that was supposed to be yours forever? Drop your story in the comments. Let's see how close our hearts beat. George Michael was 70 years old, but Alaska had made him feel 50 again. 3 weeks of fishing, glaciers, and cold wind had washed his mind clean. He'd come home ready to rest, ready to sit on his patio and listen to cicadas hum through the desert evening. His street looked just as he'd left it. The palm trees still leaned the same way. The house, white walls, blue trim, the one Evelyn had painted herself, still glowed softly under the Scottsdale sun. He smiled and whispered, "Home." He pressed the gate remote. Nothing. Pressed again. Still nothing. He got out of the car, entered the keypad code, 2748. He tried again. He laughed to himself. Battery's dead, that's all. He walked up to the door, slipped the key in, turned, and it snapped. He stared at the broken metal between his fingers. Before he could knock, the door opened. A young woman stood there. Early 30s. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," he said, relieved. "I live here." She frowned. "I think you've got the wrong address. This is 2748 North Hayden Road, isn't it?" "It is," she said slowly. "But, we just moved in last week." George froze. "Moved in?" A man appeared behind her, holding a baby bottle. "What's going on?" "This man says he lives here," she told him. The man's voice hardened. "Sir, you need to leave. Now." George's pulse quickened. "Wait, this is my house. My wife and I built this place. There must be a mistake." The door shut before he could finish. He stood there on the porch, confused, sweating in the Arizona heat. The gate locked behind him. The air felt heavier now, like the world had quietly turned against him. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers, polite but distant. One of them looked at his ID, then checked something on a tablet. "Sir," he said, "according to county records, this property was sold 3 weeks ago." "Sold?" George asked quietly. "Sold to who?" "Clarkson family," the officer said. "From a Sonia Michael." George felt the air drain from his chest. "Sonia," he whispered. "That's my daughter." The officer hesitated. "It says here she had power of attorney." "That's impossible. That document expired years ago." "Well, everything looks legal on our end," the officer said. "You might want to contact a lawyer." When they left, the sun was setting. He could see movement through the window, his living room now filled with someone else's furniture. A baby's laugh drifted faintly through the glass. George turned away and drove, slow and silent, to the Fairmont Scottsdale Princess. It was the hotel he and Evelyn had stayed in after their 20th anniversary, back when her laughter still filled rooms and mornings meant something gentle. He checked in under his full name. In the room, he laid the county printout on the glass table. There it was, the transfer of ownership, the notary seal, and at the bottom, Sonia's signature. Perfect loops. Neat and careful. Too careful. He picked up the phone and called her. She answered after 3 rings. "Dad." "What did you do?" he asked softly. "What do you mean?" "My house, Sonia." There was silence on the other end. Then she sighed. "You found out. You sold it?" "Dad, come on. You don't need that big house anymore. You're retired. It's just sitting there collecting dust." "That house was paid for," he said. "It was your mother's dream." "Dreams change," she replied. "Michael had some debts, but it's fine. The money went into the trust. You'll be okay." "You forged my name." Her tone sharpened. "I didn't forge anything. I had power of attorney. That ended 2 years ago." She exhaled. "You're overreacting. You're in your 70s, Dad. You don't need the stress of maintaining a property that size. We did you a favor." He said nothing. On the other end she added, "Look, I booked you a room at the Princess. Just relax. We'll talk when you've calmed down." The line clicked dead. George sat there for a long while, staring at the dark window. Outside, the golf course shimmered under soft lights. A young couple laughed near the pool. He thought about Evelyn. How she'd spent her last summer repainting the kitchen cabinets by hand, humming gospel under her breath. He thought about the promise he'd made, to keep the house for the family, to pass it down. And now his daughter had sold it for someone else's mistakes. He leaned back, whispered to himself, "Then what do I have?" The words hung in the room like dust. He reached for his tablet and opened the cloud folder where he kept every legal document, every financial record, every piece of the Michael family trust. He scrolled through signatures, looked at dates. He zoomed in on Sonia's signature from the house deed, then another from 2 years ago. The slant of the R was different. The ink tone was newer. He stared for a long time. Something cold began to form behind his calm. 40 years of corporate law had taught him one thing: documents never lie. People do. He closed the folder. The betrayal hadn't just taken his house. It had taken the story of his family, the one he'd built with his wife, brick by brick, room by room. But he wasn't finished yet. He had built this life once. He could dismantle the lie that had stolen it. And as the night deepened over the desert, George Michael made a quiet promise to himself. He would not lose everything he'd loved to the people who shared his blood. Every family begins with a dream. But no one ever tells you what happens when that dream outgrows the people who built it. Before George Michael came home to find his life stolen, there was a time when everything he touched seemed steady, safe, and blessed. It was 2009, and George was 63. He'd just retired from corporate law after 40 years of high-stakes cases and long boardroom nights. Evelyn, his wife of 35 years, had finally convinced him to slow down. "Let's build something that feels like forever," she said. That was how the house on Hayden Road began. A single-story stucco home with wide windows, blue shutters, and a porch meant for summer evenings. George had drawn the plans himself on graph paper, measuring every room around the idea of family. Evelyn wanted laughter in the kitchen, sunlight in the living room, and a garden filled with desert roses. Their son John, 25 at the time, came down from Seattle every few months to help paint and haul lumber. Their daughter Sonia, then 22, visited rarely. She said she was too busy finding herself. But when the house was finished, Evelyn made sure everyone was at the first family dinner. The table was long and oak-heavy, polished until it gleamed. Evelyn had cooked her famous peach cobbler, and the scent of cinnamon drifted through the house. George raised a glass of red wine and said, "To legacy. To the work we've done and to what we'll leave behind." Evelyn laughed and said, "Don't make it sound like a will, George." But he only smiled. A will isn't about death. It's about meaning. That night, under the chandelier, Sonia smiled politely but said little. She was already half somewhere else, thinking about the city, about freedom, about how her father's version of stability felt like a cage. Over the years that followed, the Michael family trust grew. George placed everything they owned under its protection. Stocks, savings, the Scottsdale home, even Evelyn's jewelry. He said it was to keep the family safe. Sonia saw it differently. To her, it was another way for him to keep control. Whenever she tried to discuss her own plans, business school, real estate, maybe even opening a small boutique, George reminded her about caution, about discipline, about the dangers of rushing into life without a map. He meant well, but to Sonia it felt like a wall. John, meanwhile, followed the map perfectly: law degree, good marriage, clean reputation. Sonia saw the pride in her father's eyes when John called, the patience in his voice when he spoke to him. She wanted that too, and she hated that she cared so much about it. Then came Philip Carter. He was everything George wasn't: smooth, spontaneous, full of wild charm. He worked in sales, but every week it was a different story: software, medical devices, property deals. Sonia met him at a networking event in Phoenix, and within months they were inseparable. George didn't like him. He didn't have to say it, it was in the silence. When Philip first came over for dinner, George watched the young man gesture with expensive confidence, all while Evelyn politely refilled his glass. Later, when the dishes were cleared, George told her quietly, "That boy has too much flash for too little foundation." Evelyn just smiled. "You said the same about me once." He laughed because she was right. But still, something in his gut told him Philip wanted what he couldn't earn. By 2015, Sonia and Philip were married in a small garden ceremony behind the house. George paid for everything. He wanted to believe that love could soften his doubts. Evelyn had grown weaker by then, breast cancer, stage 3, but she hid it behind her steady hands and bright eyes. When she hugged Sonia that day, she whispered, "Take care of each other. That's all the wealth that lasts." The years that followed blurred into hospital visits, doctor calls, and long nights of quiet prayer. George sat beside Evelyn's bed every evening, reading her favorite novels aloud. Sometimes she drifted in and out of sleep while he read. Other times she'd stop him and say, "Don't you dare cry before I do." Sonia came by less often. She said hospitals made her anxious. Philip visited once, left early to handle a business call. John flew down twice from Seattle, stayed for a week each time, and handled the paperwork George couldn't face. In 2018, on a rainy spring morning, Evelyn slipped away. Her last words were simple. "Promise me, George. No one touches what we built." He promised. After the funeral, the house felt empty in a way that sound couldn't fill. Every room carried her voice, every photo felt like an open wound. George buried himself in order: trust documents, bank statements, estate papers. He created layers of protection for the house, for the family wealth, for their legacy. He believed he was keeping her promise. Sonia meanwhile felt shut out. She saw her father guarding his money like a relic, while she and Philip fought to stay afloat. Her resentment hardened into conviction. She deserved part of what her parents had built. Philip, always the dreamer, always on the edge of something big, kept feeding that fire. He told her, "Your father doesn't see you as capable. He'll leave everything to John." And she started to believe him. George, blinded by grief, didn't notice how far she'd drifted, or who she'd become. When he did see her, she smiled too brightly, hugged too quickly, and avoided his eyes. He thought it was just distance. He didn't know it was planning. The last time Evelyn's roses bloomed before the irrigation system broke, George stood on the porch and said softly, "I kept my promise." But promises are only as strong as the people left to honor them. Because somewhere across town, Sonia and Philip were already whispering about money, trust papers, and power of attorney. The house on Hayden Road, once a symbol of love and legacy, was quietly becoming the stage for betrayal. The American dream had been built, lived in, and celebrated. But it was about to learn how fragile forever could be. Every betrayal begins with a reason that sounds almost noble. A reason that says, "I didn't have a choice." And Sonia Michael truly believed that, for a while. It started in the spring of 2022, a year before George's fishing trip. Sonia's life looked perfect on paper. A 6-bedroom home in Heaven Valley, 2 cars in the driveway, and an Instagram feed full of brunches, sunsets, and soft smiles. But behind every photo there was a bill. Behind every smile, a lie. Philip's gambling had begun as weekend poker with friends. Then came online blackjack. Then sports bets. He said it was just a side hustle, a way to beat the system. But the system always wins. By the time Sonia found out, they owed nearly $200,000 to casinos, private lenders, and one man who didn't take checks. Philip swore he could fix it. He always swore he could fix it. But every time he did, the hole got deeper. At first, Sonia tried to help the right way. She picked up extra clients, worked weekends, refinanced their car. But the numbers didn't move. The debts grew teeth and the collectors started calling. She stopped sleeping. Stopped answering unknown numbers. The sound of her phone vibrating made her flinch. One night, she found Philip at the kitchen counter, staring at his laptop. The glow lit up his tired face. He said softly, "There's a way out." She didn't ask how at first. She just wanted to believe him. He turned the screen toward her. It showed an old PDF, the Michael family trust agreement. Her father's signature, her own and John's. And beneath that, a scanned copy of an old document. Power of attorney, George Michael to Sonia Michael. Signed 2020, during her father's gallbladder surgery. Expired 2021. "He'll never know," Philip said quietly. Her stomach twisted. "That's illegal, Philip." He shrugged. "He's your father. You're not stealing. You're borrowing. Just liquidate the house. We'll pay the debts, replace the money before he gets back from Alaska." Sonia stared at the screen. The house. The house her mother had died protecting. Her father's life's work. She whispered, "That house is all he has left." Philip touched her hand. "No, baby. That house is all we have left. You want to see him happy again, don't you? Debt-free, stress-free, maybe even proud of you for once? You're saving the family." It wasn't the truth, but it was close enough to sound like one. For days, Sonia wrestled with it. Her father had always said, responsibility is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. But now, everyone was watching. The banks, the bookies, the shadows outside her door. And she was running out of right things to do. She pulled out a file folder from her desk drawer, the old power of attorney, slightly faded, edges curling. She read it again and again until the expiration line blurred. She told herself it wasn't forgery, just an extension of trust. That's what love does. It twists truth into comfort. She took the document to her old roommate, Hannah Chin, now a real estate agent in Scottsdale. They hadn't spoken in years, but when Sonia showed up with designer sunglasses and shaky hands, Hannah smiled politely. "I need a quick sale," Sonia said. "Cash buyer if possible. My father's retiring. We're reorganizing assets." Hannah hesitated. "You have authorization?" Sonia slid the papers across the table. "Everything's in order." She didn't look away. Didn't blink. Years of watching her father's calm precision had taught her how to lie without flinching. Within a week, Hannah had found a buyer, a young couple from Mesa, the Clarksons. Cash ready. Pre-approved. No questions asked. Sonia signed everything. Every page, every line, every flourish of her father's name. She practiced his signature twice on scratch paper before the meeting. The first time her hand shook. The second time it didn't. Afterward, she drove home and sat in the garage for nearly an hour. The air smelled of gasoline and perfume. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her lips trembled, but her voice stayed calm as she whispered, "It's temporary. I'll fix it." She started deleting emails, forwarding others, cleaning her digital trail like she was scrubbing guilt off a mirror. She told Philip the house was in transition, and he celebrated like they'd won the lottery. He poured champagne into 2 glasses and said, "See? You saved us." But the way he said us made her wonder if she still belonged in it. The sale closed quietly 3 days before George's flight to Alaska. While he packed his fishing rods and called John about the trip, the title papers moved through the county clerk's office, stamped, notarized, approved. By the time George's plane took off over Prince William Sound, the house on Hayden Road no longer belonged to him. On paper, it belonged to strangers. In reality, it belonged to a lie. Philip took the money before the ink dried. $450,000 straight to cover his debts, another $200 wired through shell accounts to buy more time. Sonia never saw most of it. By the time she realized the money was gone, and so was her peace. For weeks, she avoided her father's calls, answering only with short texts. "Busy. All good. Love you." But guilt is louder than silence. Every time she scrolled past a photo of her mother, every time she saw an old family email thread, she felt something crumble inside. She told herself she'd undo it all when George came back. Sell her own house, move the money, fix the records, anything. But self-deception is the easiest addiction. And by the time she realized the depth of her fall, she was too far down to climb out. When George's plane landed weeks later, she stared at her phone and whispered to Philip, "He's home." Philip didn't look up from his drink. "Then smile," he said. "It's already done." In that moment, Sonia understood the cost of every choice she'd made. Not the money. Not the law. The silence that would follow her forever. Because when you sell your father's house, you don't just lose him. You lose the part of yourself that still believed you were good. Some mornings the world still looks the same, until you realize it's not yours anymore. For George Michael, that realization came on a Tuesday. He had just returned from Alaska, skin tanned, eyes calm, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who still believed he had a home waiting for him. The desert sun felt good on his face. The sky above Scottsdale was the same shade of endless blue he'd always loved. He turned onto North Hayden Road, past the saguaro trees and the low brick walls, until he saw it, 2748, his number, his home. But something was off. The gate keypad blinked red when he entered his code. He tried again. Denied. He frowned, punched it in slower. Still denied. A strange car sat in the driveway. Toys in the yard, plastic trucks, a tricycle. He stepped closer. The front door opened. A man in his 30s appeared, polite but wary. "Can I help you?" George adjusted his cap. "I'm the owner of this property. George Michael." The man's face shifted. This is our house. We just moved in." George blinked. "That's impossible." The man stepped out, holding a phone. "Sir, you need to leave." Within minutes, police arrived. Blue lights flashing, curious neighbors peeking from their driveways. George tried to explain, voice steady but trembling underneath. "I built this home with my wife. It's under the Michael family trust." The officer listened, typed on his tablet, then looked up. "Sir, the title transfer was completed last month. It's all legal." George felt his breath catch. "Legal?" he repeated. "That can't be right." The officer turned the screen toward him. Documents, signatures, dates. There it was, sold by power of attorney, Sonia Michael. His daughter's name. He stood frozen, the Arizona heat pressing down like a punishment. The Clarksons, kind, confused, apologetic, offered water, even a seat inside, but he couldn't move. He just stared at the white stucco walls, the window where Evelyn used to water her plants, the porch where they'd once danced on their anniversary night. Now it belonged to strangers. By evening he was at the Fairmont Scottsdale Princess, sitting alone in the lobby lounge. The piano played softly. Laughter drifted from the bar. George ordered tea. No sugar, no lemon, just hot water and leaves. Old habit. He checked in under his own name, out of principle. He'd built everything in his life on principle. Now those principles were all he had left. In his suite he unpacked slowly. Shirts, laptop, leather-bound folder of trust documents. He opened the folder on the desk, his hands shaking slightly. Years of drafting contracts had taught him one thing: paper never lies. He began scanning. Trust agreement, 2015. Signatories: George Michael, Evelyn Michael, Sonia Michael, and John Michael. Every sale or transfer required 3 signatures minimum. He flipped through the scanned pages from the county office. Only 2 signatures. His daughter's and Evelyn's, copied from an old file. But John's, missing. His jaw tightened. The lawyer in him, the part that never truly retired, came alive. He looked closer. The George Michael signature was too perfect. No hesitation, no natural stroke variations. It was traced, maybe lifted digitally. He whispered to himself, "She forged it." The words hung heavy in the room. Not as accusation but revelation. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Sonia's contact, and called. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad. Why is my house sold?" His tone was calm, almost too calm. There was a pause. Then her voice hardened. "Dad, you don't need that house anymore. You should be relaxing." "I handled it." "Handled it?" That phrase burned. "You forged my name," he said softly. In the background he heard laughter, Philip's voice. Low, dismissive, careless. Sonia said, "Don't start this, Dad. You don't understand what's going on." "Then explain it." Silence. Then she said, "I'll call you later," and hung up. George stared at the screen until it went dark. For the first time in his life, he realized his daughter didn't sound like his daughter anymore. Downstairs he could hear a couple arguing by the pool, the sound of ice clinking in glasses. The world went on, perfectly ordinary, while his entire life had just been rewritten. He opened his laptop again, began listing every inconsistency he could find. Transaction dates, notary stamps, timestamps, the registration ID of the electronic signature file. Each one a thread. Each thread leading to the same point: betrayal. He thought of Evelyn. Of the hospital room, her frail hand gripping his as she whispered, "Promise me, George. No one touches what we built." He'd promised. He'd meant it. Now he'd failed her. But as he looked over the documents again, something inside him shifted. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. He saw it clearly now. Every line, every clause, every missing signature formed a pattern, and that pattern spelled one truth: Sonia hadn't done this alone. Someone had coached her, maybe even orchestrated it. Philip. He leaned back in his chair, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. All the years of courtroom experience, of negotiation, of understanding people when they lied, he felt them return. Not as nostalgia but as armor. He poured himself another cup of tea, steady hands now, and looked at the Arizona night beyond the window. He wasn't defeated. Not yet. He whispered into the quiet, "You sold my house, Sonia. But you forgot who taught you how to read a contract." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the desert. And for the first time since he'd stepped off that plane, George Michael smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. The shock was gone. The disbelief had burned away. All that remained was focus. Because when the world takes everything from a man like George Michael, it doesn't leave a victim. It leaves a witness. And a witness always remembers where the signatures should have been. There's a saying George used to tell his interns back in his firm days: "You don't win in court by shouting. You win by knowing what everyone else forgot to check." That voice came back to him now, echoing in the quiet of his hotel suite as the Arizona sun faded into amber. Stacks of paper surrounded him. The deed, the trust, the power of attorney, everything Sonia had touched, everything she'd corrupted. He picked up his phone and called Seattle. John answered on the 2nd ring, voice groggy. "Dad? Everything okay?" George hesitated for half a breath. "Did you sign anything for the trust recently?" John paused. "Sign anything?" "No." "Why?" George leaned back in the chair. "Because according to Maricopa County you did." Silence. Then John said, "Dad, what's going on?" George took a slow breath. "Your sister sold the house." The air on the line changed. "She what?" "She used the power of attorney from my surgery 2 years ago. It expired. She forged your name and mine." John exhaled sharply. "Tell me this is a joke." "I wish it were." An hour later John texted, booking the first flight out. "Be there by morning." George smiled faintly. At least one of his children still believed in right and wrong. The next afternoon, the two of them sat across from each other in the hotel suite, every inch of the desk covered in papers. John ran his fingers through his hair. This is insane. I mean, look at this. They didn't even bother to match your pen pressure. George pointed to the document on the tablet screen. See that? The art in my last name. I always curl it slightly backward. Hers slants forward. John leaned closer. You can prove that? George nodded. Not alone. But with the right forensics, absolutely. He paused, studying the ink scan again. And this, see the timestamp metadata in the digital file? It says the signature was uploaded February 21st, but the original document's date is February 14th. That's a mismatch. John frowned. So she faked it. Not just faked it, George said. She got help. He stared at the name at the bottom. Notarized by Linda Walsh, agent under Hannah Chin Realty. Hannah Chin. Sonia's old college roommate. It was no longer a personal betrayal. It was a conspiracy. George closed the laptop and reached for his phone. He scrolled down until he found a familiar name he hadn't used in years. James Harrison. Former federal prosecutor. Old friend. The man who once told him, if you ever get into trouble, make sure it's worth my time. George hit dial. James Harrison. Jimmy, it's George. Pause. Then, well, I'll be damned. I thought you were retired and golfing somewhere. Trying to be. But I've got a problem. George explained everything. The forged signatures. The sale. The power of attorney. The missing funds. By the time he finished, Harrison's voice had changed from surprise to focus. Okay, Harrison said. You still have the trust documents? I have copies. Originals are digital, secured in my cloud. Good. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to your daughter again, not yet. I'm putting together a team. A team? Yeah. You remember Patricia Chin? Forensics genius. She's even better now. I'll also get Vincent Morales, private investigator. You'd like him. XDA smart as hell. And Amy Sanders. Best process server west of the Mississippi. She's fearless. George smiled for the first time in days. Sounds like a reunion. More like a firing squad, Harrison said. Send me everything you've got. We start tonight. By 10 p.m., the hotel suite had transformed from a resting place into a war room. Laptop screens glowed with documents and timestamps. Harrison joined via video call from Los Angeles, tie loosened, voice crisp. Patricia Chin appeared in another window, hair tied back, surrounded by microscopes and scanning equipment. She spoke first. Mr. Michael, I ran preliminary ink age tests on the samples you sent. George blinked. That fast? She smiled faintly. You used to pay my lab to move faster than anyone else, remember? What did you find? The ink on the forged signature can't be older than 3 weeks. Chemical markers are too fresh. But the document claims it was signed over 6 months ago. Also, your daughter's signature pressure is off. She's left-handed. Your genuine ones show right-hand drag. George exhaled slowly. That's all I needed to hear. Patricia continued, and the notary stamp, Linda Walsh, it's registered under Hannah Chin Realty. That ties your daughter to her realtor friend directly. Harrison leaned forward on screen. That's our chain of conspiracy. George felt something awaken inside him. It wasn't rage this time, it was precision. A familiar rhythm from his courtroom days. Identify. Document. Execute. He turned to John. We're not going to shout. We're going to build a case so airtight they'll suffocate in it. John nodded, eyes fierce. What do you need me to do? Be my witness. Be my son. Over the next few hours they mapped everything. Emails, bank transfers, notary logs, timestamps. Patricia documented the forged pressure points. Vincent traced money flow from the sale into Philip's gambling accounts. Amy prepared service packets for injunction orders. Piece by piece, the puzzle reassembled into truth. At midnight, Harrison summarized the plan. We'll file for emergency injunction by Monday. Freeze all accounts linked to the sale. That gives us leverage. George nodded. And Sonia? Harrison paused. We don't tip her off yet. Let her think you're broken. George's lips curled into a quiet smile. That won't be hard to fake. The call ended. The screens went dark. The hotel room fell into silence again, except for the faint buzz of the air conditioning. George leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since Alaska, he didn't feel lost. He felt ready. He picked up his old law journal and wrote on the first blank page in years. When knowledge becomes weapon, justice stops being theory. He closed the book, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark. Tomorrow we begin. There's a moment right before a storm breaks when the air feels too still, like the world itself is holding its breath. For Sonia and Philip Carter, that moment came on a Wednesday morning. In the glass and steel offices of Phoenix Financial Advisory, Sonia was halfway through her client presentation. Her voice smooth, her slides sharp, her confidence restored after weeks of pretending nothing had happened. She clicked to the next graph, investment performance year-over-year returns, when the notification flashed on her screen. Transaction declined. She frowned, ignored it, kept talking. Another ping. Then another. Her phone buzzed. Her assistant leaned in, whispering, "Your corporate card just bounced." Twice. Sonia's smile froze. Her chest tightened. She excused herself, stepped into the hallway, dialing Philip. "What's going on?" she hissed. Philip's voice was slurred, tired. "What are you talking about?" "My card just declined." He laughed. "Probably a glitch." "Calm down. It's not a glitch. All the accounts are frozen." That word, frozen, hung between them like a gunshot. Back at the Fairmont, George and Harrison were already on the phone with the clerk of Maricopa County Court. The emergency injunctions had gone through. All Sonia's and Philip's assets, accounts, and property were under immediate freeze pending investigation. Even the Heaven Valley house, their pride and proof of success, was now under lien. Harrison's voice was matter-of-fact. "You wanted justice, George. This is the first domino." George nodded slowly, though a part of him felt no triumph. "I didn't think it would feel this empty." "That's the thing about justice," Harrison said. "It's never loud. Just final." By that afternoon the effects began to ripple. At Phoenix Financial, whispers spread like wildfire. The office grapevine, fast, cruel, unstoppable, began stitching together the story. "Did you hear?" someone murmured near the elevators. "George Michael's daughter. Sold his house while he was on vacation." "No way." "Check the court filings. Fraud, forgery, power of attorney abuse." Sonia could feel the stares before she even reached her desk. Her email froze. Her company badge flickered red at the security gate. HR called her name softly, too softly. By 5 p.m. she was gone from the building. Across town, Philip's day was unraveling too. The pool man hadn't been paid. The Porsche lease bounced. Even the electricity bill flagged as unpaid pending legal hold. He tore through the kitchen, shouting, slamming drawers. Sonia stood near the counter, arms crossed. "What did you do?" he shouted. "What I did," she snapped back. "You're the one who got us into this mess." He threw a glass against the wall. "You said he'd never find out." He wasn't supposed to. But the sound of their voices was drowned by the deeper silence that followed. The kind that comes when two people finally realize the damage they've done can't be shouted away. Outside, the Arizona evening dimmed into violet. Across town, in his quiet hotel room, George watched the news ticker scroll on local television. Scottsdale retiree files elder fraud complaint against daughter and son-in-law. The anchor's tone was neutral. The facts simple. But hearing his own name, his family's name, spoken like that, it still hurt. He turned off the TV and stared out the window at the desert skyline. The city glowed gold and red in the distance, but it all felt far away now. John walked in carrying takeout. "They're talking about it online," he said softly. "People at her firm already know." George sighed. "She'll say I'm cruel. Controlling. The father who couldn't let go." John set the food down. "Dad, you're the victim." George shook his head. "In-law, son, no one's just the victim. There's always a trail that leads both ways. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe I believed too long." John didn't argue. He just placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Later that night, George drove quietly down Hayden Road. He didn't tell John, didn't call Harrison. He just needed to see the house again. When he reached 2748, the Clarksons' lights were still on. The windows glowed softly, laughter echoing faintly inside. Through the open blinds, he saw a family sitting around the dinner table. Samuel, Gloria, 2 kids. Plates, candles, warmth. It wasn't his family, but it was a home. His home, now lived in by people who hadn't stolen it. He stood on the sidewalk for a long while, hands in his pockets, the desert wind rustling dry leaves around his shoes. His silhouette, tall and still, blended into the shadows of the walls he once painted with Evelyn. He could almost see her there beside him, laughing softly, touching his arm, saying, "You built something good, George. Don't forget that." He whispered, "I haven't." Inside the house, a child laughed. A sound so pure it almost cracked his calm. He turned back toward his car, his reflection flickering in the window glass. The lawyer in him saw victory on the horizon. But the father in him saw something else, grief that had nowhere left to go. He drove slowly back to the hotel, headlights slicing through the dark. On the way his phone buzzed, a message from Harrison. Harrison, tomorrow we move to Discovery. Morales found something interesting about the notary and the realtor. George understood. Keep going. He stared at the screen for a moment, then tucked the phone away. The road ahead was long, but he was on it now. As he neared the hotel, the storm clouds over Scottsdale began to gather, dark and heavy, promising rain. It felt fitting. Cleansing almost. George whispered to himself, let it come. And somewhere between the lightning flashes over the desert and the quiet hum of the city, justice stirred again. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Because once the storm begins, there's no turning it back. Some people think power comes from youth, from speed, from fearlessness. Some people learn too late that power often comes from patience. George Michael had learned it in the courtroom, in the quiet hours of his office. And now, it was coming to bear in ways his daughter and son-in-law could not imagine. It began with a phone call from Sonia. Dad, she said, voice slick, rehearsed, let's talk. We can sort this out. Just come to the house. George hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then said, all right. He knew better than to think this was about reconciliation. This was about control, about testing the man they had always assumed powerless. He arrived at Heaven Valley in the late afternoon. The driveway gleamed with Teslas and a Range Rover. The marble floors reflected the sun in almost blinding patterns. Wine bottles sat in silver racks, some half empty, some untouched. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and desperation. Sonia opened the door first. She was dressed sharp, a tailored suit that suggested command, but the slight twitch in her jaw betrayed nervousness. Philip leaned casually against the island, casual but bristling with tension. Dad, Sonia began, we just want to. George held up a hand. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need theatrics. Calm authority carried a weight his daughter and her husband had never learned to bear. Sit, he said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. Let's not pretend. I have every document, every record. I know what you did. And I know who helped you. Sonia's eyes flicked toward Philip. He straightened, tension coiling in his shoulders. George placed a folder on the marble countertop and opened it. Graphs, notarized papers, emails, photos of ink tests, and timestamps. The evidence was quiet, irrefutable, absolute. You wanted to sell my house, George said, voice low, deliberate. You forged my signature. You ignored the requirements of the Michael family trust. You lied. All of it. Philip's jaw tightened. You don't scare me, old man, he spat. George lifted his hand, calm as a summer morning. I taught you to sign your name in truth. That's the difference between you and me. He began naming dates, transactions, discrepancies, every lie stripped bare. His voice never rose. His hand never trembled. And every word cut sharper than any shout could. Sonia tried to speak. Dad. Silence, George said softly. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to observe. Philip slammed his fist on the countertop. Crystal clinked. You think papers scare me? George smiled faintly. No, but evidence does. And I have plenty. While they argued, George subtly placed a small recording device under the island. Hidden. Silent. It would capture everything. He had learned long ago that a calm witness can document more truth than shouting ever could. By the end of the hour, the tension was unbearable. Sonia and Philip tried to regain composure, tried to reclaim the upper hand. But George never flinched. Every argument met with logic, every threat met with calm verification. When he left, he didn't turn his back on them. He walked straight out the door, eyes steady, silent authority radiating from every step. That night, the next act of desperation came. At 3 a.m. George's phone buzzed. Security alert. Garage door opening at the Fairmont Scottsdale Princess. Philip had broken in. He was drunk, swaying, fists clenched. Words tumbled out. Threats, insults, promises of Tony Torino collecting in blood, promises of accidents George would never survive. But the man in the garage was not the same 69-year-old George Michael who had returned from Alaska stunned and betrayed. This was a man who had seen deception, traced it, documented it, and built a case capable of collapsing entire falsehoods. Every movement Philip made was captured on tape. Every slurred threat, every angry stomp, every glass bottle nearly thrown, recorded, time-stamped, stored. George remained in his car, silent, watching, listening, documenting. No sudden moves, no panic, no fear. just observation. Philip left before the police arrived. He did not see George emerge from the shadows with his phone in hand, sending the live feed directly to Harrison and Vincent Morales. By sunrise, word of the incident would travel quietly through security logs, private investigators, and the channels George had quietly established. The message was clear: they had underestimated him. They had thought age was weakness, that calm was ignorance, that patience meant surrender. But George Michael had always been patient. He had built this life on law, on documentation, on the understanding that power belongs to those who prepare, who anticipate, who observe. And now, every move his daughter and son-in-law made was being recorded, noted, catalogued. Every lie, every threat, every attempt to intimidate, a roadmap for the consequences to come. He returned to his suite, poured himself a cup of tea and set it beside the laptop. On the screen he replayed the recording from the garage. Philip's threats, clear and vivid. Sonia's attempts to manipulate, faintly audible in the background. George smiled softly. Not triumphantly, but with clarity. The old man they thought powerless was no longer afraid. The father they had betrayed, the lawyer they had ignored, the man they assumed quiet. He was awake. And he was ready. Because when patience meets preparation, even the most reckless storms break against it. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, paper, and tension. The kind of tension that makes every chair creak under the weight of anticipation. George Michael sat at the plaintiff's table, calm, precise, a quiet storm contained behind wire-rimmed glasses. All around him, reporters scurried, cameras clicked, and whispers passed like wildfire. Prominent lawyer betrayed by daughter. Family feud turns criminal. Phoenix court hears shocking elder fraud case. The story had spread faster than any document could move, the press drawn to the combination of betrayal, wealth, and scandal. Opposite him, Sonia sat in a designer suit, hands folded, knees pressed together. Her face was pale, lips tight, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. Philip leaned back in his chair, restless, impatient, a small bead of sweat forming at his temple. The judge entered, gavels tapped, and the case began in earnest. It wasn't a normal trial. Not exactly. It was a meticulously orchestrated exposure. Harrison presented evidence in layers, each revelation peeling away the illusion Sonia and Philip had built. Patricia Chen's forensic reports were first. Ink age, pressure points, metadata analysis, proof that Sonia's signature was forged. Vincent Morales presented the money trail, accounts frozen, transfers routed through shell entities, liens placed, and records of Philip's gambling payouts. Amy Sanders delivered affidavits and proof of attempted witness intimidation. The courtroom absorbed each fact like it was absorbing smoke. The whispers became murmurs. The murmurs became gasps. The prosecutor, Dennis Murphy, laid out the timeline in painstaking detail. He traced every action, every falsified document, every misstep of the pair who had thought they could outwit a retired corporate lawyer. Philip's composure cracked first. "You don't understand," he shouted suddenly, standing. "She planned it. She said he'd never know. Alaska was perfect timing." The words hung in the air, shocking the gallery. Reporters scribbled, cameras focused, and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Sonia's head snapped up. Her voice, trembling with rage, cut through the tense air. "You were supposed to die on that trip." The room fell completely silent. George's eyes closed for a fraction of a second. The words struck harder than any legal argument ever could. The betrayal wasn't just documents, accounts, or deeds, it was death planned against him. Against the man who had built everything for the family he loved. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself, feeling the weight of decades, the weight of Evelyn's memory, the trust he had placed in his children, the quiet mornings he'd spent in his study, believing family meant loyalty. He opened his eyes, clear and focused now. The mediator spoke, attempting to restore order. But the damage was done. The truth had already spoken. Evidence continued to unfold. Notary Linda Walsh implicated through emails with Hannah Chen. Title transfers traced, revealing a small ring of legal manipulation. Bank accounts frozen. Accounts traced back to Philip's gambling debts. All lies, all deception, now exposed under the harsh light of the court. Sonia's face had lost its controlled veneer. The fire in her eyes became desperation. She tried to speak, tried to spin the narrative, tried to shift blame. But every word met with a fact, every assertion challenged by the unrelenting precision of George's team. Philip's hands shook. His anger grew, uncontrolled, primal. He slammed fists against the table, glass rattling, but it no longer intimidated anyone. George remained seated, calm, almost detached. Every flicker of emotion he allowed was measured, intentional, a reminder that he had not been caught off guard. Harrison leaned over and whispered, "Your daughter can't escape the facts. The records don't lie." George nodded once. Quietly. Purposefully. The courtroom watchers, the journalists, even the Clarksons following quietly in the back, witnessed the unraveling of an empire built on deception. Sonia's fury became almost theatrical, hands gesturing, voice rising, accusations tossed like daggers. But each one landed on the shield of evidence George had assembled over weeks of patience and calculation. The judge intervened, attempting to restore decorum. But even his gavel could not mask the truth that had settled over the room like a dark cloud. By late afternoon, the mediation phase began. But mediation was now symbolic, almost ceremonial. The facts had already declared the verdict: betrayal, conspiracy, and the attempt to manipulate a man who had spent a lifetime understanding law, logic, and human behavior. George's voice, when he spoke, was quiet but authoritative. "I came here not for anger, not for revenge, but to show the truth. You both made choices. The law will hold you accountable. That is all. No yelling, no theatrics. Just certainty." Sonia lowered her head, lips pressed, trying to hold on to something. Control, pride, a fragment of love she thought she could manipulate. Philip slumped, defeated, rage dissolving into panic, knowing that every threat, every lie, every plan to intimidate George had been recorded, documented, and would be used to secure justice. George's eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the reality. The betrayal was complete. The lies fully exposed. But more than exposure, there was clarity now, a reckoning both legal and personal. And for the first time in weeks, he felt the faint stirrings of relief. Because betrayal is not just about loss. It is about truth being hidden. And truth, once revealed, changes everything. George Michael had lost trust, had faced the shock of deceit, and had confronted threats of death and intimidation. But he had gained what mattered most: control, clarity, and the absolute knowledge that the law, and patience, were his allies. In the silent aftermath, with media murmurs and shuffling papers, George leaned back, closing his eyes. Justice had begun its course. The house, the trust, the life he had built, all of it could be restored. But the cost was etched deep in memory. And every breath he took reminded him, the truth is not gentle. The truth is not kind. It is absolute. And in this courtroom of blood and ink, the truth had spoken. Justice is rarely loud, rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself with fireworks or fanfare. Often it comes quietly, measured, final. For George Michael, the reckoning arrived on a bright morning in Phoenix. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and recycled air, but George barely noticed. He was focused, steady, present. Every detail mattered: the quiet hum of the ceiling fans, the rustle of papers, the soft shuffle of shoes on tile. James Harrison presented the case with precision. He laid out every piece of evidence: recordings of Philip's threats, the meticulously documented forgery of signatures, the digital timestamps proving the mismatch, and Patricia Chen's forensic analysis confirming ink age and pressure patterns. Vincent Morales described the flow of funds, tracing every dollar siphoned from the trust into Philip's gambling accounts and the elaborate web of shell entities. Amy Sanders presented affidavits of attempted intimidation, noting every attempt Philip and Sonia made to manipulate witnesses. The room was silent except for the cadence of Harrison's voice, clear and deliberate. "You have heard the evidence. You have seen the facts. You have heard the threats, the lies, the manipulations," he said. "And now the law will respond." The sentencing was swift, almost clinical. Philip Carter would serve 18 months in federal custody for fraud, conspiracy, and wire-related offenses. Sonia received 2 years probation with a structured restitution plan spanning 20 years, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory therapy sessions. The judge emphasized accountability, noting the pattern of deceit, the breach of family trust, and the calculated manipulation involved. George sat quietly. He had prepared for this moment for months, yet he did not feel triumph. Triumph would have implied satisfaction in another's ruin. This was not triumph. This was closure. The Clarksons, whose home had been unknowingly purchased through fraud, were fully compensated via title insurance subrogation. They returned the house to George with apologies, gratitude, and quiet relief. Driving back to 2748 North Hayden Road, George noticed the desert light shifting, warm on the stucco walls, casting long shadows across the driveway. He parked, stepped out, and approached the front door. It was unlocked, keys in hand, the threshold familiar and yet strange. He entered. The house smelled faintly of sunlight, dust, and the faint memory of dinner nights long past. The rooms were empty. No laughter, no movement. Just echoes. George walked through the living room, past the fireplace where Evelyn had once decorated garlands for Christmas. He traced his fingers across the mantel, dusting lightly. The silence pressed, almost tangible yet comforting in its constancy. The kitchen gleamed, spotless and utterly quiet. He paused at the counter and there it was, a box neatly labeled. He knelt and opened it. Inside were his old photo albums, brittle with age, each page a memory. Pictures of Evelyn smiling at the camera, family vacations, birthdays, celebrations. Moments frozen in ink and laughter. Beneath the albums were his medals. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, awards earned long ago but cherished still. The Clarksons had returned them with care. Each piece, a fragment of history restored. George set the box aside, leaned against the counter and exhaled slowly. He walked through the bedrooms, each door opening to another memory. The guest room where his children had once slept, the study where he drafted contracts, the master bedroom where Evelyn's voice lingered in soft whispers, almost audible if he listened closely. He paused by the window overlooking the yard. The desert stretched endlessly, saguaro silhouettes etched against the fading afternoon sun. He could almost hear Evelyn's laughter in the breeze, carried from years past, a gentle reminder that some things could never truly be taken. He moved to the living room and looked around, eyes tracing the familiar lines, the furniture, the spaces that had been his life. The house was his again. But he felt no euphoria. Instead he felt tired. Older. Wiser. Sitting down on the couch, he opened a photo album. A picture of Evelyn on their anniversary, smiling at him across the dinner table. He touched the image gently, almost reverently. George understood now that justice was not about revenge. It was not about humiliation or satisfaction. It was about setting things right, restoring what could be restored, and ensuring accountability where there had been betrayal. His children would carry the consequences of their actions for years to come. Philip would serve his sentence. Sonia would live under restitution and scrutiny, and George would walk in the quiet knowledge that he had done everything possible to reclaim what was lost. But even as justice unfolded, the house remained quiet. Peace did not rush in. It arrived in whispers, in small moments of memory and presence. He placed the photo albums and medals carefully on the counter, letting them remind him that life is built from both victories and losses, from love and betrayal alike. Outside, the sun set over Scottsdale, painting the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. George stood at the window, watching the fading light spill across the land. He felt the house beneath his feet, solid, enduring. And in that quiet, George Michael felt something he had not felt in weeks. Calm. Not triumph. Not joy. Not even relief entirely. Just peace. The kind that comes when chaos has passed, when justice has moved, and when the past is finally acknowledged for what it was. He whispered softly to himself, almost a prayer. Evelyn, it's done. It's ours again. And for the first time in months, the house, his house, felt like home. There is a certain quiet that comes after a storm. It is not loud, not insistent, but steady and comforting in a way only time can produce. George Michael had walked through chaos, betrayal, and courtrooms filled with whispers, accusations, and threats. And now, months later, the storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. It began one morning in late spring. George opened his mailbox and found an envelope, its edges slightly worn, postmarked Glendale. He recognized the handwriting immediately. Sonia. He paused for a moment, letting the envelope sit in his palm. Part of him wanted to toss it aside, to ignore the gesture entirely. But he knew better. He had spent decades teaching law, morality, and accountability, lessons he had learned the hard way himself. This envelope was another lesson for both of them. Inside was a single folded note and 2 crisp bills, totaling $200. The note was brief, almost painfully so. Not asking forgiveness. Only accountability. From Glendale. George read it twice. Then he placed the money inside a small glass jar on his bookshelf, labeled in his own careful handwriting. Restitution. The jar glimmered faintly in the morning sun, a symbol not of vengeance, but of responsibility, of boundaries set and respected. That evening, George walked through the rooms of 2748 North Hayden Road. The house was quiet, the desert light casting long shadows across the walls. Dust motes danced lazily in the beams of sunlight. It smelled faintly of citrus trees from the backyard and of the leather-bound books he had inherited from Evelyn. He opened the doors to the backyard. The yard, once silent and empty, was now ready for life again. He set up tables, chairs, and string lights, each placement deliberate, thoughtful, a reflection of care that had been absent for years. Invitations went out quietly, first to neighbors, then to longtime ments from his law days. People who had respected him, who had seen his integrity, and who now shared in his cautious optimism. The first guests arrived. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought a casserole. Mr. Patel carried fresh bread from his bakery. The Chesterfield twins arrived with homemade cookies, giggling as they balanced them in a small basket. George greeted each one with calm warmth, the kind that comes from a man who has weathered storms and learned the value of steady presence. By twilight, the backyard was filled with laughter. Conversations wound through the citrus trees, soft light reflecting on faces, on glasses of iced tea, on hands extended in greetings and gentle claps on the back. George watched from the edge of the patio, hands resting lightly on the railing. He felt a wave of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or even justice served. It was about community, continuity, and life rebuilt on solid ground. John approached with 2 glasses of water. He handed one to George and clinked his glass lightly. "To justice," he said, voice clear, eyes meeting his father's. George smiled softly, a hint of exhaustion and pride threading through his expression. "To peace," he replied. The lights twinkled above, strung between the citrus trees, casting soft golden pools across the yard. Laughter rolled over the neighbors' shoulders like music, and George could almost hear Evelyn's gentle voice in the wind, carrying through the leaves. Later, as the guests slowly departed and the yard emptied, George sat alone on the patio. He opened a small journal Evelyn had kept years before, filled with handwritten notes, recipes, and reflections. He ran his fingers across her delicate cursive and felt her presence more vividly than he had in months. The jar of restitution sat nearby, catching the last rays of sunset. He didn't think of it as money. He thought of it as accountability, a small but powerful acknowledgement that actions have consequences, that even those closest to us are responsible for their choices. He walked inside, returning to the living room. Photographs lined the walls, memories of decades, of laughter and challenges, of lessons both joyful and painful. He lingered on a photo of Evelyn laughing at a dinner party, the room filled with friends and family. He let himself smile quietly, remembering how strong and alive she had been, and how much he had carried her wisdom with him through the darkest days. The desert night settled outside. The citrus trees swayed gently, wind rustling their leaves in soft applause. George opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The house stood firm, unshaken, as if it had absorbed every betrayal, every threat, every legal battle, and emerged resolute and enduring. He breathed deeply, the air warm and dry, carrying the faint scent of desert sage and blooming orange blossoms. He felt the weight of history, of family, of responsibility, and he felt, finally, release. True victory was not in the downfall of his daughter or the conviction of Philip. It was in the dignity restored, in boundaries respected, in life returning to its proper rhythm. It was in the laughter of neighbors, the quiet satisfaction of doing right, and the soft echo of Evelyn's memory guiding him forward. As he closed the front door and walked back inside, George paused at the bookshelf, his fingers brushing the jar labeled restitution. He touched the glass lightly, a silent acknowledgement that accountability, small though it might appear, mattered profoundly. He knew that the work was not entirely finished. Time would tell whether lessons were learned, whether Sonia would continue on a path of accountability, whether the Clarksons would find peace in their restored home. But George Michael felt ready. He had rebuilt more than a house. He had rebuilt faith in structure, law, and himself. And for the first time in years, he could rest without watching his back, without calculating the next move, without fearing betrayal in the rooms he had worked so hard to create. Outside, the desert night breathed, calm and unbroken. The wind whispered through the citrus trees, stirring leaves gently, carrying a faint memory of laughter, of resilience, of life's continuity. George looked at the house. Walls sturdy, windows reflecting moonlight, doors locked with care, history honored. And he felt a profound quiet swell inside him. He leaned back in his chair, sipping water slowly, savoring the moment. Peace was not loud. Peace was not immediate. Peace was subtle, hard-won, and enduring. And now, at last, it was here. And before the night fully settled, George allowed himself a thought for anyone watching his story unfold. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone close? Have you had to rebuild your life after trust was broken? Share your experience in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. There's power in remembering, in acknowledging, and in connecting across stories of struggle and recovery. Because even in the darkest moments, dignity and accountability light a path back to peace.